So welcome to the War over the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So let's start off with where the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is. It's in the extreme northeastern quadrant of Alaska, and there is a contiguous wildlife refuge on Canada on the other side. And then this is one of the largest untouched wilderness areas left in Alaska, and it's the home for polar bears, caribou, and more than 140 species of birds. It also happens to be directly east of the Prudhoe Bay oil facilities on the north slope of Alaska. So there is evidence that there is oil located in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, particularly along the coast and offshore. There has been very limited oil exploration in this region, and there were a couple of holes that were drilled back in the 1960s and early 1970s, but there's not a lot of detail. It's been held quite secret on what a lot of those results actually were. But the proposed drilling area is known as the 1002 area on the coastal plain, and it's an area roughly the size of Delaware. So according to the oil companies, they have learned how to minimize their environmental impact by minimizing the size and the footprint of the activities and the drill pads. And so they claim that it requires less than 2,000 acres in order to be able to have the drill pads necessary in order to be able to extract the oil from the plain. So they claim that the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge is almost 20 million acres, and they're going to use a total of about 2,000 acres. But it's not 2,000 contiguous acres, it's actually distributed over a large region. So here's an example of what it might look like, where you have distributed well pads with interconnected pipelines that are above ground. And of course, these pipelines have to move to the west to connect into the Trans-Alaska Pipeline over near Prudhoe Bay. So how much oil is buried there in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge? Well, nobody really knows. There were the drills that were done, exploratory wells that were done back in the 60s and 70s, and the U.S. Geological Survey has done their best to try and estimate how much of the oil in the region is technically recoverable. And they estimate that between basically about 6 and 16 billion barrels of oil are there to be recovered. And that is comparable in size to the Prudhoe Bay oil discovery that was made in the 1970s, and was the impetus for the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline in the first place. So we talked about this before, but just wanted to reiterate how they would explore this area. They would use these 3D seismic imaging trucks that would move along ice roads that they constructed, and they would send out sine waves, basically seismic waves through small explosion type things, and look at the reflected data that comes back to understand the subsurface geology. And those reflected waves are used to get a three-dimensional structure of the underlying surface. They would then essentially use drill pads with directional drilling to be able to access many different reservoirs from the same drill pad. In the 1970s, the drill pads were quite large, up to 65 acres themselves, and they could only access an area with a diameter of about 2 miles. So they could really only go 1 mile horizontally in any direction from the well pad. But technology has improved, and the footprint has shrank, and the area that they can access has gotten larger over time. So this was 1970. By 1980, when they were basically developing the Kuparuk oil field, which is west of Prudhoe Bay. They had shrunk the drill site to 24 acres from 65 and had expanded their horizontal reach to a diameter of 3 miles. By 1985, they had been able to shrink the drill pads to 11 acres and expand their horizontal reach to 5 miles diameter. And by 1999, when they were doing the alpine drilling pads, they were down to 13 acres with an 8-mile diameter stretch. So you have a very small footprint on the surface, but you can access a very large number of reservoirs underneath anything within that 8-mile diameter circle. So one of the things that the environmentalists are concerned about is that the area that they want to drill is precisely the area that's used by polar bears during the winter to den. And of course, all of the construction activities for these drill pads and the construction of the pipelines and such would need to be done in the winter, which could theoretically disturb the polar bears, which are quickly becoming an endangered species due to climate change issues. A secondary concern is how the activities in the coastal plain area might impact the caribou. So the caribou range quite wide, all the way from the North Slope up near the Arctic Ocean, up into the Brooks Mountain Range and beyond a little bit into Canada as well. So the caribou spend their winter on the slopes of the mountains, and they spend the spring area, the main calving area, is actually along the coast, right in precisely the area that they want to drill. So there is one Arctic village that's located within the Arctic National Wildlife Region. That's about 150 people that live in the area of the winter where the caribou hang out during the winter. So during the spring, the caribou will move from the uplands all the way down to the coast to where their calving region would be, right in the area where they want to be drilling. And then after they've calved, they move back up into the inland regions. There is one town in the proposed drilling area. It's Kaktovik, and it has a population of around 300 that are in favor of the drilling operations because of the jobs that it would provide and the revenues that it would bring into their village.